ณมหาวิทยาลัยอุบลราชธานีสมเกียรติศักดิ์ศรี
Welcome to Ubon Ratchathani University's International Relations Office as we present yet another in our series on international faculty interviews. And today it is our great pleasure to introduce Dr. Kent Hamilton, who will be explaining his own take on his home country, as well as his views of language learning and the future at UBU. So welcome, Kent. And Kent, one of the things we like to do here is to have an image that represents home to you. Could you explain what this image is here that we're presenting behind us?
Okay, so this particular photograph represents Alabama and home to me because it's actually taken from the mountain that I grew up on just outside of Birmingham, which is way across that big valley in a low spot just below the ridge line. And a friend of mine actually sent this from home to make me jealous, missing the misty mornings, what a lot of times they call here the sea of fog type thing that I grew up with. He did a good job. It kind of makes me homesick. But this is it. And I included some other ones that are probably more famous, like the Huntsville Rocket Center, which is where NASA developed the Mercury and the Gemini and the Saturn V rockets for the moon project, and also the space shuttle was developed there, and rocket boosters for them, which is a big part of Alabama. And of course, Birmingham and Vulcan, picture that's overlooking the south side of town where University of Alabama, Birmingham is, which is where my alma mater is, one of my alma maters. And then, of course, the big game, if you're from Alabama, if you're into American college football, Alabama-Auburn football game, there's no other game bigger than that.
And then, thank you so much, Kent. And also, what brings you to Ubon as opposed to Paris or Bangkok even? How did you end up in Ubon Ratchathani?
The short answer to how I came to Ubon, and the long answer kind of is both the same thing, my wife. My wife, the other Dr. Hamilton, is originally from Ubon. We met while she was completing her master's and preparing for her PhD. She attended University of Alabama, Birmingham. And we met through a friend of mine who was from Isan, who married an American Air Force airman way back in Vietnam, and I went to school with their children, and she made friends with June when she moved there, so we met, and I knew she'd be coming back to Thailand to serve the Thai people and help build the healthcare system here. So I said, well, I'm in love with her, it's a nice place, so that's how basically I ended up here, kind of kismet fate, however you want to say, rather than a specific plan.
And what would you say was the biggest difference that stands out to you from Ubon Ratchathani compared to your home state of Alabama in the United States?
I've been thinking about this, and there's a lot more that's similar than there is different. I mean, especially the people are very similar, very cordial, very welcoming. What we call a certain gentility, word we'd use in the South. So there's a lot more that is similar, but the biggest difference is, of course, the language. and the culture, the base culture. We have a lot of things in common with how the people are and that, but the culture, one being a Judeo-Christian based culture, the other being basically, or for the most part, a Buddhist based culture. There's a big difference in the culture and the outlook. I think that's probably it, but it's not. Some people would say a culture conflict, but I don't really call it that. I call it just a difference, because it's really no conflict to it. It's just different. I think that difference is what makes it so nice.
Then also, again, it's difficult to speak to this, but what was your own experience learning other languages, and also your experience here at Ubon Ratchathani University with teaching and learning languages?
I think if you're going to teach a language as a second or foreign language, you need to at least try to learn one or more. And of course, Pampu Basa Thai, Noi Ching Ching. So having learned other languages, European and Thai, kind of gives me a good idea of what my students are going to have trouble with, especially me studying Thai, because the problems I have with Thai, my students tend to have the exact same thing in reverse. My classic example is placing modifiers after or before the noun they modify, like Pasa Thai, Rot Si Ding, the car red. Or, sorry, not the car red. Where then in English, red car, and we put the in front of it that doesn't exist in Thai. And when I try to do it in Thai, I try to create an article that doesn't exist. I'll try to put like ni or nan, something like that. And si ding rot. Kachai, rot si ding. As soon as I do it, I realize I just Englished my Thai. And I refer to that as my students here Thaiing English. And because I study it and I make those mistakes, it helps me predict the areas that my students will need help with. My approach to teaching is rather eclectic. I'm very much a constructivist, if you want to get down to the technical terms of it, when it comes to language. And I'm very much into communicational teaching strategies and language acquisition rather than pure rote memorization. There's a place for both, and you have to mix it together in a proper way. You have to teach students like ours at university level and adults differently because they have more of an ego, of a self-image that they have to maintain, and they become more cognitive than children are. Even though we still learn basically the same way, we have that other luggage that becoming older and our peer groups and that bring with it. For every class, I explain to my students, they're going to make mistakes. And I tell them, I want them to make mistakes. And I usually get this, what? You want us to be wrong kind of look. I'm like, yes. Making mistakes tells me several things. Number one, it tells me you're trying. You're pushing your limits, you're trying new things, you're learning new things. You don't get things perfect the first try. It also tells me what I can help you with. The things that you do and that you say that you get perfect might have been right. You've already got that. But when you make an error, that tells me, aha, this is an area where I can help my students improve and grow.
It's so good to hear all of that, Kent. And finally, Kent, if you had to make a guess about the future, where do you see UVU headed in the future, and in particular in terms of the global culture in which we now live.
The events of the recent years, that's an even harder prediction than ever before. I mean, I think UAB, it's wrong university, it's wrong country, wrong continent. So I think UBU is well set to continue to grow and gain more of an international footing and presence. They have a good international relations staff. They have a good core of international instructors here that is slowly growing. And that gives them a good basis to grow from. And I think going forward is really hard to predict because of the economic chaos caused by COVID-19, by SARS-CoV-2. And that makes it so hard to try to predict, because as much as I'd love to pretend that things like economics and other parts of the world, money and politics, don't affect education and where the university or our students can go, it really does. And right now, it's really hard to predict. But I do think if they continue on the path that they have, they're going to continue to grow and improve, and their international presence and reputation will continue to grow.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Kent. It's been a pleasure, and certainly I learned so much about language learning just talking to others who are teaching and learning other languages. So we are much obliged for your visit today. Thank you and best wishes.